12:32 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we change of pace next, change of conversation, change of subject, and a studio guest in the studio as well. John Sweeney, welcome back as well from Kyiv. When did you get back?
A week ago. It's good to be in Blighty. The weather's terrible, though.
Is it? It's been quite nice for a while, but it seems to have turned again. It's hard to know where to start. Do we start at the end? Do we start with where we are now compared to where we were at the beginning?
Well, we don't know the ending yet.
Of course not.
Do we? But I said on day 2 of the war, when I was arrested as a Russian spy, do I look like a Russian spy? I said to the guy, the Ukrainian soldier, and I give one piece of advice, James, which is never argue with a man with a loaded machine gun.
That's fairly sound advice, I think.
But I said it was. I don't think on day 2. I don't think this is going to. This is the end of Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, or even. Although I was in trouble because I'd been arrested as a Russian spy, the Ukrainians let me go, etc., etc. The person I thought was in trouble was Vladimir Putin because the electricity's still on, the internet.
On day 2, so if it was going to work, it would have worked immediately.
It should have done, right. And basically,
like in Grozny, is that what I mean? Did Grozny
kind of? It took them a while, but basically
cracks appeared.
There was something wrong with the Russian attack from the get-go.
Right.
And there are a number of reasons for that. But what is absolutely clear is the Russians lost the Battle of Kyiv and they retreated. At the moment, the battle in the Donbass is in a kind of stalemate. But what's important to note is that the Russian army have made no big significant advances from the early days of the war. And the balance of war is changing because because the kit is arriving from the West, in particular the American artillery, which has a longer reach than the Russian artillery. The American howitzer 777, if you're into the kind of train spotting bit of war, is that can fire 25 miles, and the Russian artillery can mainly fire only 15 miles. So that's like having a boxing match with somebody who's got longer arms.
Yes.
Down the track, you're going to lose. The last person at this level of Russian power who made this kind of mistake was the last Romanov, Nicholas II,
right.
And he ended up being shot dead by the Bolsheviks in a basement with all his family. And I don't think that's going to happen to Putin, but he's not a well man.
How do we know that?
Well, you look at him.
Yeah.
You look at him. So when I met him, I doorstepped him in 2014 about the shooting down of MH17, and we had a very clever freelance producer called Nick Sturdy, who's fluent in Russian, and he worked out that Putin was opening a mammoth museum in Siberia, and it's virtually impossible to doorstep Putin in Moscow.
Yeah.
But in the sticks you can go and get him. And I pretended to be a professor of mammothology.
I don't think that's the technical term, Sweeney, is it? Mammothology, honestly.
I haven't come all this way to be mocked, James.
Pachydermology.
Anyway, this I pretended to be a professor of mammothology, and I said, "What about the killings in Ukraine?" And Putin stopped and addressed my question, and he'd had his Botox, so his skin was plasticky, but essentially his face, his cheeks it reminded me of a ferret or a weasel, kind of thin. Yeah. And lean,
right,
and fit, and a healthy, whatever he was, 60-year-old something then. So he doesn't look like a ferret at all. On telly, he looks like a hamster with his cheeks completely puffed with
He looks bloated,
straw.
Doesn't he? He looks bloated.
And there's a friend of mine, some geezer I met in a pub called Ash. His proper title is Professor Ashley Grossman, and he's Professor of Neuroendocrinology at Oxford University, and he's a Professor of Medicine. And he says these cheeks, that suggests steroids.
Right.
And steroids you take for back pain, you take for all sorts of things. Putin fell off a horse a while back, maybe 2008, no one's quite sure. Bad back pain. And So there are sources. Mike Weiss wrote a fantastic piece in New Lines magazine saying he's got cancer of the blood. I met somebody from Ukrainian military intelligence in Kyiv who said he had cancer of the liver. Ashley Grossman suspects, and remember, Putin isn't his patient; he's only looking from afar, that it might be cancer of the lymphatic glands. None of which is good. So he doesn't look well. The puffy cheeks suggest steroid treatment, and that's not good. Steroids give you steroid rage. They give you hyperaggression if you overdo them.
Yes.
And
well, we know that, don't we? For roid rage. So
it's roid rage. So the possibility is the man in charge of the world's greatest stockpile of nuclear weapons is right now suffering from roid rage.
Good Lord.
The good news, let's not panic, people. I think if he presses the red button, somebody in the Kremlin will have disconnected it.
Do you really?
I do no longer think that Vladimir Putin controls the Kremlin machinery like he did on the 23rd of February.
Right.
Because this war has been a catastrophic mistake for the Russian army, for Russia, and in particular for the man whose war it is, Vladimir Putin.
How much of it is Russian error as opposed to Ukrainian resolve? And I hope that's not a crass question.
It's not. So two things have happened. One of which is that, or rather, the mathematics of war are simple. When you invade, you need many more attackers, invaders, than defenders.
Right.
So
you have to overrun.
One ratio is 3-1.
Right.
The Ukrainians had 200,000 in the army, but they had an additional 100,000 in kind of militarized police, customs, etc. 300,000 people under arms. So at 3-1, Putin needed to invade Ukraine with 900,000, maybe 1 million soldiers. Actually, because of Ukrainian resolve, because Ukraine, they're defending their homes, it's as simple as that. You may have needed 7-1, that's 2.1 million, i.e. 7 times 300,000. Instead, Putin hit it with maybe 200,000, maybe less than that. I.e., that's a tenth of the 2.1 million if you've got a 7-1 ratio. And the mathematics of the war was the reason I stayed in Kiev at the beginning, because I didn't think he had enough soldiers to take Kiev, and he didn't. And the whole war has been a disaster. So
a lot of journalists left, of course, just for people who aren't aware of that. So I hadn't realised that you'd made a sort of informed calculation on the likelihood of coming under.
Your colleague Andrew Pierce,
yes,
who writes the Daily Mail, actually asked me at one point, "When are you leaving, John?" And I found myself saying, "Well, I voted Remain in London in 2016, and in 2022 in Kyiv, I'm voting Remain." Andrew.
You've got to hate people that bring Brexit into everything. For crying out loud, honestly, change the record. Really.
Dear pot, yours kettle.
Okay, so knitting all of that together, how could... And we've missed one element of it, which is the fact that they might now be making efforts to limit the potential of what he can do without him knowing, with reference to the nuclear button. How could he have got it so wrong? And the bit we've missed out is the fact that people are terrified of telling him things that he doesn't want to hear.
Yeah. So my great hero in life is a guy called Professor Robert Lifton, who was an American military psychiatrist who treated American GIs who'd been brainwashed, who'd been captured in the Korean Civil War,
right,
caught in North Korea, and then brainwashed by the Chinese communists. And actually, he wrote a book about this called Totalitarianism or Thought Reform. It's the first big book about brainwashing, with brainwashing as a term. And then this writer, Richard Condon, wrote a book called The Manchurian Candidate,
yes, which
is then turned into a film, and then that's turned into Homeland. So it's that story. And Lifton is he's the enemy of totalitarian governments, but also the enemy of totalitarian cults. Let's not go there, the lawyers are listening. But Lifton says the enemy of totalitarian thinking is tolerance of humour and tolerance of mockery.
Right.
Vladimir Putin has got no one in the Kremlin who says, "No, boss, this isn't going to work." who has got the courage, the balls, or the status to say that to him. So
That he used to?
Yes.
Right.
So when I met him in 2014, he was supple and subtle enough.
Yes.
I'm a difficult and annoying BBC reporter. You just have to ask BBC management, and they're like, well, back then. But he could see that I was trouble, but he stopped what he was doing and answered my question in a way that was supple. And part of the cleverness of Putin for most of his years in power was that the face he would give the West was one. It was almost like he was somebody we could do business with. George W. Bush, so I can look into his soul, all of that stuff. And certainly with me, he addressed my question. He lied to me through his teeth, but nevertheless, he stopped and took the question. So there was a time when he could act in a rational way, or at least have that mask.
Yeah,
and it worked.
Well, I can engage with this guy. I'll mislead him, but I'm up to the job of doing
yes, and there is some now. So what people think is that COVID, in particular, reduced his circle even more dramatically.
Right.
And then something else has happened as well. So there's a friend of mine who's a guy called Semyon Gluzman. Who's one of the world's greatest living psychiatrists. I met him first in 2016. Anyway, he came to my kind of leaving do party. I'm going back to Ukraine in June, but he came to my leaving do party in Kyiv. And embarrassingly, we had my flat had a door to the loo, the main door in, and a kind of broom cupboard. And somebody was stuck in the loo. And I said to Semyon, Can you just go into the broom cupboard while anyway? And then like 20 people came in all at once, and I was pouring drinks.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's this tapping on the door, and Semyon, like one of the world's greatest psychiatrists, has been locked in the broom cupboard. I've forgotten about him. And he spent, because he challenged the Soviet abuse of psychiatry, he spent 10 years in the Gulag, often in the punishment cell.
Right.
And then I opened the broom cupboard. I said, terribly sorry. Semyon, he said, this is not as bad as the punishment cell in the Gulag.
Wow.
Anyway, but Semyon thinks that Putin is still sane, so that he's not going. But his circle of information has reduced and reduced and reduced. But he's not mad, which means he's not going to blow up the world.
It's hard to grasp that because, as you mentioned, the scale of his power and the scale of his influence. So it's not a denial of reality. That's the business of the media in Russia. So Putin will be aware of what is going on now, but in terms of what was going to happen if he activated the invasion, no one would have said once he'd framed a desire to do it, no one was going to tell him anything he didn't want to hear.
They're all yes men.
Yes,
and there is no and so it's very much like the scene in Downfall, which endlessly parodied, but that beautiful scene where finally one of the yes men says there is no Sixth Army.
Yeah,
and Hitler goes nuts, and it's and so what's happened is that it's the Ukrainians who have finally said to Putin, "No, you're not doing this.
There is no Sixth Army,"
and he's getting the message.
Is he? Well, hold that thought, because it's 12:45. We'll come back after this with John Sweeney back from Kyiv and heading back out there in June. You're still going to do this podcast festival with me, are you?
Yeah.
We're doing that live on stage?
Yes.
Excellent, because I thought I was going to be doing it on Zoom. I was going to be on a stage with you on a Zoom screen coming in all the way from Kyiv.
I've come here especially to go on that. And the person who's organising it has promised me a gin and tonic if I go on if I turn up on time.
Yeah, well, I hope she's got a bucket.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
12:48 is the time. Before we return to John Sweeney, just a word of congratulations to Stanley Johnson, father, of course, of Mr. Brexit himself, Boris Johnson. Stanley has just successfully applied for French and therefore EU citizenship, thereby guaranteeing himself all the freedoms, rights and protections that his son stole from you, just so that he could become Prime Minister. So, nice work if you can get it. Speaking of which, back to John Sweeney, who has just returned from Kyiv, whither he will go back later next month. The question of how it could have happened, I think, has been answered. How it happened, how such an epic miscalculation could have occurred, and part of it is going to involve the uniqueness of Vladimir Putin and his status in Russia, and the successful imposition of totalitarianism. I'm going to ask you a weird question next, because it preys on my mind. If it had worked, if on day 2 you'd have been on the first train out of Kiev, because you could see the different writing on the wall, you could see that the attack was going to work, and although it may have taken a little bit longer to be over, the cracks had appeared that you believed would turn into fissures, and then Kiev would fall. Would the West have just left it like they did Chechnya? Because all the sanctions, his calculation would have been that they never do anything. They're all bark and no bite. And if it happens quickly, then there'll be all sorts of expressions of outrage and disgust and fury. But Chelsea would still have an owner, and various yachts currently impounded around the world would still be sailing the seven seas, and certain politicians who shall remain nameless would still have their jobs on the boards of Russian companies. Or am I being unduly cynical?
No, you should never be. My great hero is Diogenes the Cynic, who told Alexander the Great, the ruler of the known world, "Get out of my light." One can't be cynical enough. But what happened was a number of wonderful things all happened all at the same time in the right sequence for once. And it was kind of beautiful. The first great thing was that the Americans and the British said to President Zelensky, "Get out, get to Poland, and we'll look after you." And Zelensky says, "I don't want to ride. I want ammunition."
Yeah, I remember.
He stayed.
Yeah.
And that was a beautiful thing.
But that means that American and Western intelligence would have been thinking that Putin was going to pull it off as well.
Yes. I mean, I like to say this. This is one of the gags I like to say in the Buena Vista early on in the war. But I'd say, so the CIA and MI6 got a lot of money, cost an awful lot of money. I'm much cheaper, but I got it right. I.e., the Ukraine, and so Semyon, 75-year-old psychiatrist, are you going to fight? He says, "I'm too old to fight. I've never killed anyone. I'm not going to do it. But if the Russian tanks come to Kyiv, my part of town, I will hit the streets and I will protest." From a 75-year-old, you've seen the video of the granny with a tin of tomatoes,
yes,
throwing it at the Russian drone. That's what it's like. Everybody was saying, "No, this is our country. Go away." And the difference is, I think, and Martin Amis has written brilliantly about this in one of his novels, that if a man who exudes and oozes violence sort of comes at you, your natural human instinct is to back off and say, okay. And the West did that again and again and again. The problem for the Ukrainians is they couldn't do that. They had nowhere to go. They couldn't back away, because then that would be the end of their country and the end of them. And so they had to fight. And because they had to fight, they actually called the Kremlin's bluff.
Right.
And then there's this kind of beautiful cascade of moments when the Ukrainians fight, and remember that enormous traffic jam of Russian heavy metal. People ask me about it. They said, "Well, I'm still, in the Kiev version of Vauxhall, and there's a whole traffic jam of Russian heavy metal on the M1, but it's not actually hitting me right now. It's still stuck in a traffic jam, and a traffic jam isn't very frightening. So let's get some perspective."
Yeah, sure.
And then what happens is the British first. All credit to Boris Johnson, who I do not like as a politician.
Sure.
But he did send the end laws. And honestly, the single best phrase in getting through, when you spent too long in the Buena Vista, and I know some people who did that, you're in trouble because the curfew started in martial law. You can get shot on sight. And the single best phrase to get through the checkpoints was "God save the Queen."
Fantastic.
Literally true.
She deserves it,
and,
doesn't she?
And it's also not "God save Boris Johnson," but "God save the Queen."
Sure.
There was a gag that, she at one point she was ill, and I said, no, she's not ill. She's teaching Ukrainian special forces how to use the new anti-tank stuff.
Brilliant.
But and the Ukrainians loved that and laughed at it. So what happened was, then the British got it, and then the Americans got it and said, no, the Ukrainians are fighting incredibly hard and cleverly. And I know Ukrainian fighters, for example, they started using thermal imagery, then the Russians started using drones with thermal images. So the Ukrainians got, those heat maps you give marathon runners? they not only keep the heat in, they defeat thermal imagery
Is that
machines.
literally just like camouflage?
So I have friends
Good grief.
who have. This is not. It's moving at night.
Yes,
I know
of
it's
course.
Bako foil.
Sure, no, I know.
But wrapped in Bako foil, Ukrainian fighters
Won't
go
pick
in,
up.
pop up a drone, spot the Russian tank, tell the Ukrainian artillery, and pop goes that tank.
Wow.
It's so smart.
Wow.
They're so cool and so brave.
You haven't quite answered my question. You've explained to me why.
But the other thing is that the Ukrainians, through their courage,
Yes.
told us a lesson, which is that democracy must be defended, that free speech
Yes.
is not free.
Yes.
There is a price to it, and it's a price worth paying. And what's
Wow.
happened is the leader of the free world, President Zelensky, has taught all of us that to have this kind of conversation we're having right now, James, that costs things.
Right.
And you've got to fight for it. You've
At
got to
some
defend
point.
it. And that is why Kyiv is so fascinating, because
Yeah, I
it
get it.
feels like being London in 1940,
I can imagine.
and including the drinking and the dancing.
All right, enough. If you don't stand for anything, Burr, what will you fall for? Is kind of the lesson that Zelensky has taught the rest of us.
Yes.
What happens next? I know that's a simplistic question, but you're
Going for an ad break, aren't we?
Right, no, it's the news. You'll get the hang of it one day. This broadcasting lark. How do you see? Because today's story is that Putin is scapegoating military chiefs, blaming them for the failures that are entirely on him. We know the situation in Mariupol. Russian and Ukrainian claims very, very different about what's happening there. But no advances. Even a month in, when Kyiv had failed to fall, or they'd failed to take Kyiv, a lot of observers were saying, well, it's going to kick off in Donbass and they'll get the best of it. No, they haven't really succeeded anywhere. How does it unfold or unravel? You've got 2 minutes to tell us about what's going to happen in the next 2 years.
So I'm doing a podcast called Taking on Putin, but I've just finished a book called Killer in the Kremlin. You're invited to the launch party.
Thank you.
And so you, anyway.
Sheila's just come into the studio.
Yeah.
Not on telly now,
sorry, I've forgotten I'm not on telly. I am in a bit. Anyway.
Right, you've now got 1 minute and 40 seconds to tell us what's going to happen in the next 2 years.
So the end of the book, which I wrote yesterday, is I think Putin leaves the Kremlin in a box.
Right.
I think that he's in big trouble. The last person who made this mistake was called Nicholas II.
Yeah, he said.
And
I mean the overextension.
so the possibility is that Putin goes in for surgery and doesn't recover. If I'm the CIA, I'm saying to all the Kremlin doctors, you want to live in Beverly Hills forever? We can organise that.
Really?
Or a Russian general who is fed up of being saying, why are you such a coward, takes out his revolver and goes pop, pop, or something. Or even the other thing is that it's possible that Putin has poisoned himself with so many steroids that he's got cancer. And this is completely Shakespearean.
Yes.
The possibility is that he has poisoned himself and he's got cancer of the liver through over-abuse of steroids, and that Vladimir Putin, and this is the irony, has ended up poisoning himself.
Good
and
grief.
that could be his end. Whichever version of this is, I do not think that... I'm an optimist. I do not think that Vladimir Putin is long for this world.
Christmas?
All Fool's Day.
Yeah.
Maybe a year, maybe 2 years.
Right.
By the way,
that's how it ends. Because
when
there's
I was-
not going to be a retreat. We've run
Okay,
out of time. There's not going to be any form of retreat or admission of
he
failure.
can't...
And the likelihood of victory is diminishing daily because of the ordnance that's coming in from the West.
Yes, so that the American heavy metal will change the war this
Yes.
summer.
Yes.
The Russians will go backwards. Then there is a possibility of more and more economic pressure.
Right.
And then you've got some kind of second Russian revolution down the track. I'm an optimist. I think Vladimir Putin will leave the Kremlin in the box in the next 2 years.
John Sweeney, thank you. Before I say goodbye for another week, there's a text that's just come in that I'm sure Sheila won't mind me reading out. It says, "Who's this guy? He's good."
He's all right.
You can hear John Sweeney. Well, I mean, loads of work, his own podcast as well, but a few of you suggesting I should get him on Full Disclosure. We've already been there and done that. You can find it in the archive. That's it from me for another week. We'll do it all again Monday morning from 10. Have a fantastic weekend. Here's Sheila Fogarty.